A casual observer might say that wearables are fast replacing watches on people's wrists. Or are they? Despite the tremendous popularity of these devices like Fitbit and Jawbone, some researchers say that about a third of Americans who purchased a wearable tracker stopped using it within 6 months. There's also widespread debate about how much tracking your steps or your sleeping pattern really makes us lead healthier lives. But it's fair to say that wearables are still a young technology. People making them are looking to the future, trying to improve data quality, trying to rethink the design of the devices themselves. So we have a group of 3 tech manufacturers here to talk about this ongoing work and this fabulous trend. I'm pleased to welcome Neumitra co-founder Robert Goldberg, data scientist at Censored Rachel Kalmar, and the Chief Technology Officer at Manufacture New York, Amanda Parks. They are joined by my colleague, Steve Clemons. He is himself a wearable enthusiast. That may be the understatement of the day. Take it away.
I have such wearable enemy. How many of you have something you're wearing that's plaguing your life right now, or telling you when you're? How many of you are wearing Fitbits or Jawbones or? Put your hands up, man. Do you enjoy yours? Yeah? Do you ever leave it off accidentally and just feel, wow, I didn't get credit for those steps? You know, I was walking in our office at the Atlanta, in cold days, I was walking around, I was charging it. I mean, Rachel, I just need to ask real quickly before we get going. I mean, stand up for a minute again, we did this earlier. How many, what aren't you measuring? But I guess we'll get into the question of what you are measuring, but what kinds of things are you alerting yourself to on the various gadgets you're wearing?
So most of these things are measuring activity. There are some that measure other things as well. Many of them are measuring the same thing, but as a data scientist, I want many copies of the same data so that I can look at things like variability. But I'd say that we're still in the early days here, which is these things can tell me how many steps I took, and so I call the state of wearables right now B1.
Now, what level of steps per day are you? Are you like a David Sedaris, 60,000 steps a day?
No.
No.
It's really the amount of activity I have is not necessarily constrained.
So how do you deal with the charging? Do you just plug yourself in?
Right through my belly button.
But I mean, it's got to be a hassle, right? I mean,
So my people sometimes assume that I charge them while I'm sleeping, but I want to measure sleep too. So I have a bank of chargers on my desk. It looks like USB.
I do really poorly at sleep. But I just want to say, because this would be fun, we should have a fun discussion. Let's turn on the ampage of the room here. We've got some people who are thinking. You sort of said you're the wearable person, which we'll get to. And Robert, with my new stress, what do we actually call this?
We've been calling it Neuma.
Neuma stress zapper.
It's a stress watch.
Stress watch. So I commented to those of you who were here earlier when I was sitting and doing an earlier thing, this thing began buzzing. And so I wish I had a bell to let you know. So right as Margaret was introducing me, it went off. And so I've got to turn, and that means I just got a spike of red on my iPhone that could possibly end my life. I don't know. But, I do want to, my goal now is to come into things like this and where I really am comfortable and I want to be getting blue and, be calm and not have this, stop it, buzzing me. But, I just sort of interested I had a dream about this watch, or this contraption. And is it the same technology of lie detectors?
It's similar.
Yeah, so tell us about that.
The problem is lie detectors aren't accurate at telling you're lying. They tell you're getting.
But it's a skin test, or basically a test that detects differences. And when I was reading about the Neuma watch and the Neuma sensors, what was going on, it sounded to me, sensitive. It began to make me think that if I can beat this watch, I might be able to beat a lie detector. Had you thought about that avenue of sales?
We were approached, but that's not our mission. Our mission is to quantify brain health, and so this is one factor among many, and we've been amazed by how far we can take this one factor and integrate it into your calendar, into the places you go, and even into the music you listen to. But overall, it starts. So
tell us how you got into this and how you started doing this. I noticed you're watching with you. You seem very calm, cool, and collected right now. Are you buzzing at all?
Yeah, I'm pretty stressed.
Yeah.
I'm an introvert by nature.
Can we become teammates? Will you get to see my stress points and I'll see yours?
So we've taken a hyper privacy perspective, because now when you're measuring effectively the mind, so we anonymize everything right on the phone. We don't know it's your data in any sense of the term. We make it very hard to make that ever possible. We do think there might be ways, for my wife to see how my day went, but for us, that's an add-on feature. That's not something to start with. We start with hyper privacy, and if you lose your phone, it's stored just on your phone. If you lose the watch, it's not connected to you in any way. So I'm a neuroscientist by training, and just from my own family history, I realized that really mental health isn't measured in any way today. And we started 5 years ago. So we've built a watch, and now watches are sort of becoming passé. So we're moving on to the next set of technologies.
But you're measuring, you're sending me a signal, and we'll jump to this, in colors, right? And I have on my Fitbit my steps, the amount of sleep, my heart rate. I have numbers, essentially, as opposed to colors. I suppose I could do this in colors. But why do you pick colors rather than saying, okay, Steve, you have a stress rate of 98 out of 100, and you need to get it down to 60 to be normal or something?
Yeah, that was the first challenge for myself and my team. My background was in neuroimaging, so I looked at a lot of data for over a decade, and it just felt overwhelming. And so rather than giving people steps, heart rate, glucose, our view is what's one number to help you to measure and manage your life, and it correlates with the autonomic nervous system, which is sleep, exercise, and stress. And so depending on where you are, and the context that determines what's happening. So blue to red we thought is very intuitive for a lot of people. We didn't need to spend a lot of time getting you set up, and you're able to understand, okay, this was a red meeting, this is a red place.
Where's Margaret? Is Margaret in the room? Margaret Lowe-Smith? She's out there. Okay, I was feeling blue. I had 7 conference calls with her the other day. All of them were in red. So don't share that with her. But Rachel, in your wearable on your watches, one of the trends that we've been seeing in wearables is the movement from things you put under the wrist to actually being in your clothes. The Under Armour proposal of wearables there, wearables in your shoes. Well, I mean, there's a and we haven't gotten to sort of the fashion first side of wearables, but are you prepared to go further than you already have?
Sure.
Yeah?
I have plenty of space. If you send me something, I'll wear it.
Just break it out. Tell us your story. How did you get? How did you become the kind of wearable diva?
I usually call the look data punk rather
The data punk?
than a diva, but I'll take that for now. I worked at Misfit Wearables for over 2 years and joined them right before we made the first product, which was the Shine. And so this was an activity tracker, and obviously as a data scientist, my background's also in neuroscience, but I said, okay, I want to get all the data I can from all the different devices, so I started wearing all the devices I could and thought naively that I would just take the data from all of them and compare it and also look at the user experience, et cetera.
Is there a platform to do that?
So what I ended up giving a whole set of conference talks about was not things I had learned from my data, but 1, that I couldn't get my data, and 2, why. And it's less of an issue of like companies not wanting to share it, and more of an issue of the field being pretty new. We don't have things like standards. So even if I could get my data from all the different devices, I wouldn't be able to necessarily use it. And things like business models, which is a big issue in this space too. We're building these hardware products, but they're not traditional hardware products. And so those business models don't really fit either. And so I've spent the last couple of years wearing these every day. I think I have the world record for number of devices worn continuously. But the things that I've been learning are more about the data ecosystem than about myself. And so I kind of think of the wearables in 3 different categories. One of them is the category of things that we can do right now, which is to give you daily feedback on how many steps you've taken, whether you're stressed, whether you have incoming alerts, et cetera. And then the next category is looking at longer term trends, so longitudinal studies of yourself, of populations, being able to build predictive models of health, of disease. And then the third category is interaction with your environment. So this is more like the Internet of Things, where my devices can talk to my house knows when I've left and it can turn off the lights. This is just the very beginning.
Do you have something like that now?
all of these things are connected through my phone.
Can you give us a journey through your wrists, just a very quick one, and share with us what some of these do?
Sure. So most of these are measuring activity. I have a Misfit Shine, a Fitbit Flex, a Fuel Band, a Jawbone Up Basis watch, some more Misfit devices, some flashes, another Basis, some more Shines, the Samsung Gear, Pebble, a whole bunch more. This one is a little bit interesting. Does anybody know what this is? This is an antique pedometer from 1877 made by Tiffany and Company. Does
Wow.
anybody have,
And it still works.
yeah, it doesn't pair with my iOS or Android, but the battery life.
Is it accurate?
It's pretty good. You can adjust for stride length. But does anybody have guesses on why they made pedometers?
I have no idea. And why Tiffany made pedometers?
Yeah. It was for land surveying because there wasn't an accurate way to gauge distance. And so people wore these as a way to kind of give a proxy for distance.
Fascinating. And can you give us any insight do you sort of write any critiques of these? What's the most accurate? What's the most usable? What's the most promising in terms of? I'm really interested in the house that knows what I'm going to do, and that the Internet of Things, in the sense that surrounded are all these sensors that interact with what we're wearing. And I don't think we're there yet, but I'm wondering what insights you have into that.
No, we're getting close. So I'd say that people ask me all the time, which is your favorite, which is the best, and the answer.
Sorry to ask you such
always
mundane questions.
No, the answer is always, it really depends on what you care about. There's no one thing that's the best. And the problem with all of these, the Achilles heel of all wearables, is battery life. If you had batteries that could power things for a week, then you could do everything.
Buzzed.
But
when she mentioned battery life.
battery life. Yeah, but you have to make trade-offs. And so either you can have something where the battery lasts a long time, but it does fewer things, or it has more sensors, and it can give you more interesting data, but then you have to charge it more often. Like the Apple Watch, the battery will last about a day. Some of these, like the Misfit Shine, the battery lasts 4 to 6 months. Obviously, you're not going to be able to order pizza from your wrist with something that doesn't, like, you can do more but it's all a trade-off against battery. And so as far as accuracy, the answer is it doesn't really matter. They're all directionally consistent, but there's no fundamental unit of measure called a step. There is when you're walking, but you do many things that are not walking. And so all of these different companies have decided to kind of bias towards including a little bit more noise or excluding a little bit more noise. And it really becomes more of a question of what are you trying to do? If you're trying to motivate people to be more active, then you want to err on the side of overcounting a little bit.
And Amanda, how have you made your way into the non-wearable wearables?
So I am focused on the next generation of enabling technologies and wearables in our laboratory, which is, first of all, so primarily fiber science. And I also believe that solving the mobile power problem will be the kind of golden ticket of this whole space. And so I'm paired with a material scientist at Princeton who's working on fiber batteries. And so the idea being that if there's battery life that is sort of literally integrated into your clothing that you're wearing all the time, you have more surface area to volume ratio for the batteries, you have more battery life, you also have them, they're invisible.
Of course, you can never wash it, right?
No, that's the whole point. No, actually, the sort of the tagline of our lab is flexible, stretchable, washable. Like, if we can get there for everything. So there's also, we're working on different kinds of wearable solar ideas. So like, how do you charge the batteries that are in your fiber? And then generally kind of integrating the circuits themselves into the clothing to make a lot of the stuff invisible. I love your look, but that's not my look, right? And there's no option. So I think one of the things that I'm focused on, also coming from the fashion world in New York City, is how do we actually give people more of an extensive aesthetic options, a lot of the sort of motivation right now is coming from Silicon Valley and the tech world, and it's very much reflected in the design of these devices, and also the fact that the people who are making them are technologists first, really, or even just product designers first. They're not fashion designers. And so, one of the things I like to point out is, the Apple iPhone, you can market the same device at a 7-year-old man and a 14-year-old girl, and they can take that into their identity. As soon as it crosses the threshold of the body, you would never have a fashion item that you could do that. And so we need to start thinking about the sort of how the fashion industry strives on sort of individuality, personal expression, and those kinds of choices. I mean, I like to make the example of like, what could I make for my mother that she would wear? She's a kind of elegant older woman. There's certain things that it would be great if I could get her to track. But I would never be able to give her one of these. And so
let me ask you guys an uncomfortable, are these sort of rich people's distractions in the sense that we're talking about fashion, we're talking about stress meters that cost a lot, we're wearing lots of various measurable devices for people that are probably, out walking or doing these things anyway. I mean, do you see how the world we're talking about now can represent a greater portion of society than using them now, or is this just essentially a boutique for the Cartier of wearable types?
We started by talking to patients.
I see.
We were looking at anxiety disorders in particular. So about 1 in 3 in this room will have an anxiety disorder in lifetime. And anxiety and stress and that relationship, we don't understand today because there's not data. But what we heard from patients was they didn't want to feel like a patient. They wanted to just blend into what they're already wearing. And so that's what led us 3 years ago down the path of making a watch. And now we've realized that not everyone, patient, old, young, wants to be wearing a watch, or this particular looking watch with a square face and so forth. So now we move away from watches to make it even more invisible. And I think that's where, having talked to patients, what stood out the most was that even as a patient, they don't want to think of themselves that way. Who does? Right? And I may have an anxiety disorder. I still wouldn't want to think of myself that way. I'd want to think of myself.
So what comes after the watch in your world?
There's lots of things that are worn at the wrist.
I see.
So I think the reality is better be attuned to what people are wanting to wear to reflect their personality.
And variety.
And make the technology invisible than try to make it sort of stand out. And I think that's the big question for these body computers is, will people in this room, if 25 or 30 people were all wearing the same thing, do you feel like a cult, or do you feel special, or is that somehow something to be proud of? And it is different from something that goes in your pocket.
Now, we have a lot of players in the health industry in this room. We've got clinicians and doctors and insurance companies. Do they respect you guys or not? I mean, are you respected by this industry, or are you looked at skeptically?
No, I mean, our customers are almost predominantly researchers and clinicians. So we benchmarked against $20,000 clinical equipment. And so we've learned what we could from normal everyday users, but it's working with researchers and clinicians that what motivates me. We're not going to quantify brain health without having the buy-in from the whole healthcare industry. And for us, we take that very seriously. It's why we're a Boston company. We didn't move to California for that reason alone. We just have a lot of...
And how about you, Amanda, in your world of the fashion world? How do the Tory Burches and Diane von Furstenbergs look at what you're doing?
So that's a complicated relationship, and that's partly because the fashion world and the technology world don't yet speak each other's language.
I noticed that, we're having James Park here. He's actually doing a deal with Tory Burch.
Yeah, and I think that what's happening right now is there's a lot of partnerships that are kind of very surface. Which is a big name and a big name. And we're trying to kind of get a little bit deeper and have people kind of do development from the ground up. So I think the most successful one, maybe inside of fashion, is opening ceremony and the Intel for the Mika bracelet, which is a true fashion item and not a kind of wrapping, a brand wrapping. But I also think it's really important to recognize how early on we are in this journey of wearables. Like any computer, you mentioned, like, is this just elitism? And I think that as things become, like computers, desktop computers were, of course, incredibly expensive in toys at one point, and now they're sort of everywhere. And we have to kind of think about it in that context. And that's one of the reasons why I care about the kind of integration into clothing and fibers is, we don't really think right now about Lycra as a technology. And so that will spread, throughout the world on every single level. Everybody wears clothes, and so when we start to think about how these things could spread, that's the way that I see it, in just kind of through the kind of language of clothing and fashion.
One of the people with wearables, put your hands up again. Let me grab somebody here. So, Do you walk every day and pay attention? Do you download your data every day? You didn't, yeah? You're just one of these occasional hobbyists, you know? Anybody completely obsessed with your wearable? I mean, who wants to be brave enough to share with me? So right here, you are in the back? Yeah? How many, and do you hit your target every day? Okay, so I am interested in this subject. You know, Margaret Lowe Smith mentioned that after 6 months or so, people drop them and they leave them and they're covered. So I have worn.
Weigh in on that?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm
So
interested.
that after 6 months, 1/3 of people are not wearing them.
Right.
I am surprised that 2/3 of people are still wearing them. That's fantastic.
Yeah?
I mean,
Yeah.
these things, they can give you data, but most people don't want data. And so that people are still wearing them before we've yet got into the second part, which is how these are actually going to be useful,
Yeah.
I think is really
So I'm really interested in that behavioral question, which isn't often discussed at conferences because it's perhaps too boring. But feedback, right? We get feedback. We think about change. You know, O-Power that Alex Lasky helped launch, a local company that basically works with utilities, and it feeds people data back on their energy use and compares it to others. And you're beginning to see people change their energy. They get greater facility in understanding how they're using energy and changes them. And I have to say, in my own experience with Fitbits and Jawbones, is that I now go out and I do a minimum. I do my 10,000 steps, and screw David Sedaris for saying that's nothing. I mean, it's a lot, right? Anybody who does 10, it's a lot. And anybody, yes, you can clap your hands for 10,000 steps. It's hard to do it every day. I've done it every day for 3 months. I haven't missed a day. But it meant at the end of the day, I would have to go out at 11 o'clock. I did 3,000 steps on an airplane once, you know, going up and down the aisles. But it does raise these. You can do it if you show people that you're not a terrorist and that you have, you know, a reason. But you know, when you go through the process of doing these things to sort of do it, it does in fact. It created a platform, sort of a minimal threshold for physical activity. I'd like to do a lot more, but I found in my own habits, my tendency was to go to the gym, run 8 or 9 miles, kill myself, and not run for a month. And so it did do this. And so I'm interested in you guys from a practical health perspective of what you think is happening out there. Is that feedback coming in and really creating a healthier citizenry that can expand, or is this simply just a superfluous distraction? Rachel?
I mean, I think in the past, like, we have very little idea of the baseline state of our health. Like, none of us have been tracking, very few of us have been tracking activity for years. And even things like the bathroom scale, like now a lot of us have connected scales and our weight is sent to our phones. But even just very basic metrics, like all of these things track activity, but they also track sleep. Like, I have no idea how my sleep changes with seasons, but that's the kind of thing that we can start to get insight into by having these. And so I think that it's very positive to be able to have that data and to learn, like, oh, I'm actually a lot more active than I thought I was. Or I gave one of these to my roommate and she started wearing it. She's like, you know, I always thought of myself as a very active person, but I'm really only very active like 1 or 2 days a week.
And Robert, on stress, what's your goal for someone like me?
Well, our mission is to quantify brain health for you and the world. So
I should never be in the red?
Well, that's the question, is the population data required to give you a good answer to that is something that's very much a part of our mission. So to give you concrete examples, you know, we're losing 22 veterans a day to suicide.
Right.
Because they feel isolated. They're an island of one. They don't connect to where their data could live relevant to every other veteran or police officers or nurses, people who work in very high stress environments. Well, we've had 8 suicides at MIT this year. And that same problem that veterans are facing is also being faced by undergraduates at a very competitive university. So when we think about feedback, we think about not only what you can tell someone in the moment, you're getting increasingly stressed, what we can tell you over days, but then months and years as well.
Well, let me open up to the floor.
Wait,
Yeah,
can I
please
just make
go,
one
Amanda.
quick comment on that? So I actually agree with you both, but just to play devil's advocate for a second, there's this phenomenon that kind of gets brought up from now and again called aporexia, which is how much can all of this information that is kind of coming into us, will that stress us out more? And I think that like part of that is about how we design the systems for like, how do we make choices about what we know? And I think it's also about personality types. Like certain people can deal with it and other people can't. And so that becomes part of the kind of interaction design that's just as important as sort of what we're tracking.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think it's very interesting. I agree with you. I think when I was on those conference calls in my car, I started yelling at my watch.
Yeah.
Stop it, stop it. Let me open up the floor. Questions, comments? Right here, yes. Lady in blue. Lady in black, and then the lady in blue.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Cinco. I'm with the President's Cancer Panel. We're actually,
Use a loud voice and be dramatic.
we are actually in the middle of a series on connected health and activating people and patients to to have better cancer outcomes. And so one of the questions that we are getting from people and that we're really interested in are, these are essentially N-of-1 studies. Like you have your data and you take it to a doctor and the doctor doesn't really know what that means. He can or she can figure it out for you, but maybe on a population level, there's very little information we can glean from these N-of-1 studies. So what standards are needed in order to leverage this on a population level? You mentioned there were no standards, and with the internet, there was sort of a decision to use a particular standard, and we haven't really seen that with wearable technologies, but mHealth in general.
So standards and data, and by the way, can we get cancer from these things? That was a big New York Times article today.
Not yet.
Not yet.
I don't think we know. I just don't think we know, right?
There are many things.
It's like with cell phones. We don't
I'm sure
know
that was
either,
just tweeted.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, there was a big New York Times article looking at whether or not we know enough about wearables, the devices, the 3G things in our phone. I mean, it was a long article, and I'm just sort of interested in whether that's sort of whether there is a carcinogenic. But the more important question is, in a world without data, where you don't have the macro data, and you're trying to sort of glean the micro case, how does that eventually get fixed?
I'd say that things like ResearchKit that Apple just announced are really exciting. It's certainly there are issues with ResearchKit, there are issues with anything, but we're moving in the direction of being able to democratize or to allow much more participatory studies by saying, this isn't everything, this isn't a research grade device, this is your phone, but we're allowing access to many more people, and then that will also pave the way for being able to start working with data in this kind of volume and have more serious conversations about standards and how to integrate all of these different sources for things like research.
Let me ask a question of the audience, because has anyone ever been asked by your doctor how well you slept last night as a part of a physical, or just raise your hand, I'm just curious. So, okay, so a minority, but I'm interested in where we know how well a city slept and how much stress a city is under, and so now a doctor compares you to the population that you live in at your company, in your age range. And so as I think there's this effort to open up data of this type, I think those are the types of questions that become almost automatic for the doctor. So he can start the appointment with the observation, relevant to the city, relevant to the weather, relevant to your age group. You really didn't have a good night of sleep last night, but it looks like it's been going on from your device for weeks, if not months. And how does that start to change the standard of care when those are the first questions being asked?
Arianna Huffington and Oprah are doing all this stuff, and Ariana's a good friend, and I always sort of look at these things as sort of slightly hokey, in the sense that I'm a skeptic of anything that looks semi-cult-like, of getting people to sleep more and all of that. But sometimes these movements occasionally coincide with data that demonstrate that. So are you the data guy that could be partnered with the Oprah Ariana project on?
I need Rachel's help, and
yeah?
I think we all need to be working on these types of problems. It's not just us, right? So when we're talking about a $1 trillion economy, there won't be one company, even if it's the biggest company in the world, that wants to be $1 trillion in their market cap. They'll take a big slice. And I think that's kind of what people have been missing is the Apple Watch is a medical device. It's not one in a month from now, but it is for them long term. So how, that to me is a very exciting world where they're doing things like ResearchKit and they're building medical devices.
And I'm sorry, just one last comment on the idea of standards is as we move towards things that are more like stickable and injectable, the whole notion of that is going to become much more present. People start asking those questions much more immediately. Plastic bracelets don't seem scary to people, but something that goes under your skin does. And I would like to see more sort of leadership from inside the kind of research and science community to set those standards, as opposed to starting from political or legal structure that will be imposed on it. So if we can kind of be moving forward proactively by creating those.
So let me take a quick last question from you.
My name is Daniela Stein with Insight, and we're sort of nearing it already in the conversation right now, and I kind of wanted to tease it out a little more. The goals motivating these products are so, they're very noble. It's a great idea to measure the stress affecting our populations. Like, that's a fantastic goal. But right now...
He's noble. I'm not sure anyone else is noble.
Well, even just having more information is beneficial to the consumer, pretty much regardless whether or not they're using it. It's good to have it. But these things are still so cost preventative right now. And we kind of talked about it a little bit with, is it a rich person's distraction? And I'd just love to hear the trajectory that you guys are seeing for this kind of technology, or how quickly a college student could be measuring their stress. College mental health is such a big deal. So just...
These will be giveaways in the next 10 years, without a doubt. And it'll be medical quality data that's being given away by insurance companies, by universities, by the company you work for, how much stress you're under, how much sleep you're getting. Companies should care about that because they're paying for your best performance. So I'm very hopeful, especially following Moore's Law, as these become giveaways in the same way that cell phones. It's who pays for it that is still the open question, and that still needs to be sorted out.
Isn't the latest Shine $50?
Yeah, so the Flash is $50,
Yeah.
and you can buy them on Black Friday or other times for
Yeah,
$25.
So in 30
Also-
minutes, we're going to have James Park, the CEO and founder of Fitbit, come join us, and we'll take the next round of questions there when James is back, because I'm sure it'll be relevant to Relevant, but I've got to cut this out. But what a fascinating discussion to have, and what an interesting place, because we wouldn't have had this discussion 5 or 6 years ago, I don't think. Right, Rachel? You weren't wearing like this yet. When did your wearability trend begin?
The first Fitbit I got was in 2011.
So I'm still right. So 5 years ago, still right. Thank you very much. Please give a round of applause to Robert Goldberg, Rachel Kalmar, and Amanda Parks. Thank you so much.